Hello, today we are going to talk about objects, prototype, and inheritance in JavaScript. Objects are building blocks of JavaScript. Prototypes pave the way for inheritance. Prototypes are properties of objects in JavaScript. Everything in JavaScript is an object. As a formal definition, an object is a collection of properties, and a property is an association between a name, key, and a value. Value can be anything. It can be a function, method, or even another object. We shall be looking into code examples to discuss further in detail. There are 5 different object creation patterns in JavaScript: factory pattern, constructor pattern, prototype pattern, dynamic prototype pattern, and Object.create. We shall be looking into these object creation patterns along with code examples to dig deep. Objects and prototypes and inheritance are one of the key topics among the interviewers for JavaScript programming. Please pay attention to the details and keep practicing. Now let us look into code examples. First example in object creation pattern is a factory pattern. In this example, we have a function which is named car factory. Make, model, and year of a car is being passed as argument to this function. Inside the function, a temporary object is being created every time this function is going to be invoked. We are assigning properties of this object, make, model, and year, and the values being passed via arguments. It also has an inner function, print car details, which is just printing out the properties of the object. Ultimately, we are returning this object, newly created object, and we are creating a variable const car1. We are assigning car factory, passing on the arguments. So what happens? Let us try to debug and see. First, let us just run this example and then we will be debugging this. We see that car2, the print car details, prints out the properties of the object which has values passed for car2, Fiat, Punto, and 1990. So now let us try to debug. Okay, so car1 and car2 for both car factory has been invoked. We can see that car1 holds the values Ford, Mustang, and 1969, while car2 holds the value Fiat, Punto, and 1990. So what is happening that every time car factory is invoked, a new JavaScript object is created on the heap, and values are being assigned the properties of this newly created JavaScript object. Hence, whenever a car factory is invoked, car1 holds a newly JavaScript created object, car2 holds a newly JavaScript created object, and whenever we try to print out the details respective to car1 and car2, they get their respective details rather than any overlap. Here, car factory is serving as a function which is a factory of object creation. Hence, this pattern is called factory pattern. Another object creation pattern in line is constructor pattern. In this pattern, object type is defined by a constructor function and an object instance is created using new keyword. We can also observe property of an object can also hold on another object. Like in this example, we can see engine spec is being passed as another object called engine. It is being assigned as one of the properties for car. We shall be debugging this example and seeing this in action. So let us try to put a breakpoint here and also at this point and try to run this code. You can see whenever new keyword is used before invoking this car function and we try to execute this step, although we have already done this for engine 1, so we can first try to see engine 1. So if we try to see engine 1, we see that ultra and 1.3L meter, which is the capacity of the engine basically, so are being passed as arguments, and an engine 1 object has been created with capacity and name as properties and 1.3 liter and ultra as values respectively. Now engine 1 is being passed as an argument which is going to be assigned as a value to this particular property, engine specification, engine spec in short. So whenever we execute this statement, now I go ahead and try to see my car. So my car has been created. This is an object. Engine spec now contains 1.3 liter and name it Ultra as an object with properties and values, and other than that it has other properties, make, model and year. So this is the summary of constructor pattern in JavaScript for object creation. Next up in line is prototype pattern. This is one of the key patterns of object creation and also the inception of inheritance in JavaScript. We shall be looking closely into this pattern with the following example. First, let us understand what are prototypes. Prototypes are the mechanism by which JavaScript objects inherit features from another object. We will be seeing how prototype chain works and how prototype property can be used to add methods to existing constructors. JavaScript is often described as prototype-based language because it provides inheritance. Objects usually have a prototype object which acts as a template object that inherits methods and properties from. Okay, that is too much of a theory, so let us dig deep into the example. Now let us try to debug this and see how it runs. In this example, person_proto is an empty object and properties are being assigned to a property called prototype. So every object has a prototype property attached to it. So if we try to console.log person_proto, what we see that person_proto itself does not have a property. However, it has a property called prototype. And in the prototype, we have properties like name, age, address, and whatever values we have assigned are being displayed here. Now let us see the benefit or the power of inheritance provided via this prototype property. So let us continue further. In this example, let us create an object. The object's name we are not defining currently. However, age and address we are assigning. Now, if we try to print console.log or let's say dir new person, let us inspect and see what happens. Let's start at the first breakpoint. Let us move to second breakpoint. So this is new person. Interesting. If we try to see new person, we see that it has now its two properties, address and age. It does not have a name property because name property we have not added. Fine. So what should it print out if we try to print out console.log new person.name? Will it print out undefined? Okay, let's try to test this out. As we can see, when we try to print out new person.name, it prints out Ram. How did this happen? We have not assigned name to this new person. Then how did it print out Ram? If we try to print out age, it shall print out the same age. It is being assigned. Let us try to test this out as well. You see, it is printing out 25. Similarly, if we try to print out address, it is printing out the address assigned to it. But how come it is printing out the name which is not even assigned to it? Let us again debug this. Now this new person has name, still does not have a property name. However, it has address and age, which it is printing out correctly. However, it is containing person_proto. Now person_proto has a prototype, name, age, address. Name is assigned as Ram. So in JavaScript, a link is made between object instance and its prototype, and the properties and methods are found by walking up the chain of prototypes. In this example, whenever we try to search for name, JavaScript first checked whether this new person has this property name. If it does not, it walks up to its prototype and checks whether the prototype has name or not. Since new person is created from person_proto and person_proto has a prototype with name, so it prints out Ram. However, if we try to assign a property name and then if we try to run this example, it prints out Krishna. Why? Because now it itself has a property called name. So it does not need to walk up to the prototype. It does not need to walk up the hierarchy. This is how inheritance works in JavaScript. Next object creation pattern in line is dynamic prototype of pattern. This is just the extension of prototype pattern which we have discussed earlier. In this example, we can see that a constructor function, a constructor pattern is being used to create an object out of this dynamic person function, which is a constructor function. However, while creating the object, it is checking whether the object has a property called printDetails, which is a function itself. Type of keyword is used in JavaScript to get the type of a property of an object in JavaScript. So it is checking. If it is not present, then it will create a printDetails function and add it to the prototype of this dynamic person. Let us see this in action. We can see that it is successfully printing out name and age of this object, which is being assigned the values passed via arguments. We can also see that dynamic person 1, an object created via this pattern, can access printDetails function. If we try to debug this, we shall see that dynamic person 1 has properties as name, age, and address. Also, dynamic person has a prototype. Now in the prototype, it has a function called printDetails. Correct? So the dynamic person 1 has been created via this dynamic person constructor function. So if we check for dynamic person 1 and the proto, which is the link for its inheritance, this underscore underscore proto underscore underscore. However, this is a deprecated keyword which MDN usually says. However, I don't see it deprecated. So we can see inside this, it has a reference for printDetails. So this is how dynamic person 1 accesses printDetails function. So whenever new keyword is used to create an object which is dynamic person 1, prototype references this dynamic person which has printDetails inside it. So printDetails can be accessed to dynamic person 1 via this chain, and hence it is able to print out the results. Last object creation pattern is Object.create. This has been introduced after ECML5. Now we shall see that we are creating a random object, just assigning a property to it and also assigning a value to this property. So random object has a property var and we are assigning the value 20. So random object is basically referring to the initial JavaScript object as its prototype. We shall be debugging this and seeing this in example. And then we are trying to create another object out of random object. So then another object will be pointing to random object. And then random object's prototype will be pointing to original JavaScript object. Let us not waste time and see this in action. We shall see that random object has a value 20 as its property value 20. Its proto is the JavaScript object basically. Okay. Now we shall inspect another object. Now another object itself has not any property. No, it does not have any property. It has proto, which is a prototype chain basically, which has a property value 20. So when we created Object.create and random object we passed on as argument to Object.create, so it added this to the prototype reference of another object. Hence, it can access val property of its prototype and also print out the value. So whenever we print out this value, we can see that it holds the value 20 since random object is now prototype of another object. However, if we try to assign the value explicitly to it, we assign this property val explicitly to another object, then in that case another object now has its own property val and value assigned to it is 40. So it is printing out 40. Point to be noted is that object created out of null points to null. Let us also inspect an empty object created via this function which does not have any properties assignment inside it. It is not a constructor function which is we normally see. So let us debug this. We see that temp, the function, the object name basically, its prototype is just a constructor, which is an empty constructor. Its argument is null, caller is null. Also, the prototype is a normal function, which is self referring to the JavaScript object. So ultimately, everything in JavaScript is an object. I have attached a GitHub link to all these code examples in the description below. Please do not forget to check that. We have completed all the 5 object creation patterns. We have looked at the properties of objects. We have looked at prototypes, how prototypes are used to create inheritance in JavaScript, how prototype chain works among the objects in JavaScript. Hope you like this video.